Since 19th of April, 1945, the air was heavy with smoke and fear. It was 19th of April, 1945, just weeks before Germany would fall. Colonel Erich Hartmann stood on the edge of a ruined village in western Germany, his face covered in dust, eyes scanning the quiet road ahead. The war had changed everything. Once a proud and decorated officer, now he was just a tired man leading broken soldiers in a fight that felt more like survival than duty. His unit had been retreating for days. The American forces were moving fast, stronger and better supplied. German fuel reserves were almost gone. Tanks were parked with empty tanks. Trucks were useless without gasoline. Morale was low. Every soldier knew the end was close, but no one wanted to speak it aloud. That morning, a scout had returned with unbelievable news. A convoy of American fuel trucks had taken a wrong turn and were hiding in the woods just 2 kilometers away. At first, Eric thought it was a trap. How could the Americans be so careless? But they confirmed it. At least a dozen trucks full of high-grade gasoline, abandoned or stuck in muddy ground, guarded by only a few soldiers. It was a gift, a chance to breathe again. Eric gathered what was left of his men. 45 soldiers, 3 working trucks, and a tank that could still move if they found fuel. They moved fast, careful not to attract attention. The plan was simple: attack quickly, scare the guards, take the fuel, and disappear. They reached the clearing just after dawn. The Americans were not expecting them. A few warning shots, some shouting, and the guards surrendered. No blood was spilled. It felt too easy. Erich walked between the trucks, touching the metal tanks filled with the golden liquid Germany desperately needed. He couldn't believe it. 50,000 gallons, enough to power dozens of tanks, hundreds of vehicles, enough to move troops across the country. His men were cheering. For the first time in weeks, they were smiling. But Erich didn't smile. As he stared at the rows of American fuel trucks, a strange feeling grew in his chest. This was supposed to feel like victory. Instead, it felt like a mistake. He turned to his second-in-command, Lieutenant Weber. "Do you know what this means?" he asked quietly. Weber grinned, thinking it was hope. "Yes, sir. We can move again. We can fight." Erich shook his head slowly. "No, Weber. It means they have so much fuel, they can afford to lose this much. And it doesn't matter." The lieutenant's smile faded. Erich looked up at the sky, gray with smoke. "We're done. If the Americans can let 50,000 gallons go like it's nothing, this war is already over. We just haven't fallen yet." He gave orders to refuel the vehicles and move, but his heart was no longer in it. The war wasn't just lost on the battlefield. It was lost in the numbers, in the silence of those fuel trucks, in the faces of his men who were happy to find scraps, while their enemies had mountains. The convoy rolled out slowly, full tanks and heavy hearts. Germany had captured American fuel, but what they truly found was the truth. The enemy was too strong, and the end was near. The captured fuel trucks moved quietly through the broken countryside, weaving between trees and craters left by weeks of bombing. Colonel Erich Hartmann sat in the lead truck, staring out the window as the forest passed by. His fingers tapped against his knee, mind racing with thoughts he didn't dare speak aloud. Every drop of that American fuel was a reminder of how far behind Germany had fallen. It wasn't just the fuel, it was the silence that came with it. No pursuit, no counterattack, no planes overhead looking for their lost supply line. It was like the Americans didn't even care. Behind him, soldiers were laughing, patting each other on the back. Some were even singing. They thought they had struck a miracle. For the first time in months, they had enough fuel to keep moving. The tank crew was especially excited, already refueling their engine, eager to hear it roar again. Erich didn't join in. He knew better. A few hours later, they reached an old German outpost, half-bombed and mostly abandoned, but it had working radios and space to hide the trucks. They parked everything and started unloading fuel. That night, Eric sat in the command room with Lieutenant Weber and a few senior men. Maps were spread across the table. Weber pointed toward Berlin. If we move fast, we can join the defense line near Magdeburg. Reinforce them with the tank and trucks. We might slow the Americans down. Eric nodded slowly. And then what? Weber looked confused. Then we fight. Fight with what? Eric asked coldly. We have one tank, 5 trucks, 45 exhausted men, and fuel that doesn't even belong to us. The room went quiet. He leaned forward, eyes dark. We didn't win anything today. We just saw how rich our enemy is. They lose fuel and don't even blink. We gain fuel and think we've turned the war around. That's the difference. That's the scale. One of the younger officers, Captain Lorenz, slammed his fist on the table. So we give up? Is that it? No, Eric said calmly. But we stop pretending we can win. There was silence again. Not one man could argue with what they all felt, but never said. Later that night, as the men rested and the trucks cooled down, Eric stepped outside. The stars were barely visible behind the smoke, but he kept looking up. Somewhere out there, the Americans were advancing. Maybe the Russians, too. Every direction led to an enemy. He thought of his family in Dresden, if they were still alive. Thought of the young soldiers under his command, most barely old enough to shave. Thought of the 50,000 gallons of stolen fuel they were so proud of, and how meaningless it felt. Suddenly, the silence was broken. A radio inside the outpost crackled to life. A panicked voice spoke in fast German. This is Command Sector 9. Magdeburg is falling. Repeat, Magdeburg is falling. Russian armor spotted outside the city. Civilian evacuation has failed. The message cut out. Eric turned and looked at Weber, who had come running. We were going to head there, Weber said quietly. Eric nodded. We're not going there anymore, Weber asked. Then where? Eric stared at the parked trucks, at the quiet forest, at the men sleeping with false hope. We're going east, he said. Into the mountains, away from all of this. But that's desertion. No, Eric whispered. That's survival. He had just seized American fuel, the rarest treasure in the dying German war machine. And now he was planning to use it, not to fight, but to run. Because for the first time, Colonel Erich Hartmann wasn't thinking like a soldier. He was thinking like a man who knew the war was lost. The sun hadn't yet risen when Colonel Erich Hartmann gave the order to move. The cold morning air bit at their skin, but the engines now had life again. The tank rumbled, the trucks hissed, and the soldiers, though confused, obeyed without question. They had fuel. That was all that mattered, for now. Weber rode beside him, his face tense with questions he wasn't ready to ask. Not yet. Behind them, the rest followed in a line through the forest road, deeper into the Harz Mountains. Eric knew the region well. Small villages, narrow passes, and hidden trails, perfect places to vanish in the chaos of a collapsing war. But word had already spread. By midday, whispers were passing between the men. Why are we heading east? I thought we were going to fight. Are we retreating? Some were angry. Some were relieved. Most were just tired, but none dared question the colonel to his face. By late afternoon, they stopped to rest in a small, abandoned lumber station tucked deep in the forest. Soldiers jumped off the trucks, stretched, and looked around nervously. It was too quiet. No bombs, no planes, no orders from Berlin. Just trees, wind, and the cold truth hanging in the air. Captain Lorenz finally confronted Eric. "Colonel," he said sharply, his eyes full of challenge. "What exactly are we doing here?" Eric met his gaze calmly. "We're surviving." Lorenz's jaw tightened. "So we run?" "No," Eric said. "We wait, we regroup. Maybe we even hide. But we don't throw ourselves into a war that's already over. Magdeburg has fallen. Berlin will fall next. You know it. And the men?" Lorenz snapped. They still think we're soldiers. Eric took a step closer. Then maybe it's time they start thinking like fathers, brothers, sons, not just uniforms. The room fell quiet. Weber stood in the back, silent but listening. Lawrence's eyes burned with pride and fear. Then he turned and left without another word. That night, the mood shifted. The men sat around small fires, talking quietly. Some cried for the first time. Some spoke of home, wondering if it still existed. A few clung to the idea that Germany might somehow rise again. Most didn't believe it anymore. Eric sat alone, staring at a map lit by candlelight. Red lines marked lost cities. Circles showed areas under American or Russian control. Germany was shrinking by the day. There was nowhere to go. But something else bothered him. Why were those fuel trucks left unguarded? It kept echoing in his mind. The Americans were careful, strategic. They didn't just abandon 50,000 gallons of fuel without a reason. Was it really a mistake? Or something else? At midnight, one of the scouts came running into the camp, out of breath and pale. "Colonel, you need to see this." Eric followed him to the edge of the clearing. The scout handed him binoculars and pointed. On the opposite ridge, barely visible between the trees, were glints of metal. Dozens of them. Tanks, American tanks. Parked, silent. Watching. Eric froze. They hadn't followed them. They were already ahead. The fuel hadn't been a mistake. It was bait, a trap. Eric slowly lowered the binoculars, his mind racing. The Americans didn't need to chase them. They had given them the fuel, watched them take it, let them drive off. And now, they had tracked them straight to this mountain. They wanted to see where the rats would run. Eric turned to Weber, who had appeared beside him. "Wake everyone," he whispered. "Tell them to stay low. No noise, no fires, no movement." "What's happening?" Weber asked. Eric looked back at the ridge. The tanks hadn't moved. Not yet. They're watching, waiting, like hunters. He suddenly realized the war wasn't just lost. It was being studied, and they were part of the lesson. The forest had never felt so alive and so deadly at the same time. Every rustle in the trees, every creak of a branch, sounded like the breath of an enemy. Colonel Eric Hartman moved slowly between his men, whispering sharp orders. No lights, no movement unless told. We are not alone. Fear spread through the camp like poison. The fires were put out. Soldiers sat in the dark, rifles clutched to their chests. Their earlier celebration turned into silent panic. The taste of victory, the stolen fuel, now felt like poison in their mouths. By dawn, the American tanks on the ridge still hadn't moved. No engine sounds, no radio chatter intercepted. Just their silhouettes, waiting, watching. Weber crouched beside Eric near the edge of the clearing, staring through binoculars. What are they doing? Why don't they attack? They're making a point, Eric replied coldly. We're not their enemies anymore. We're just leftovers. Weber looked at him, confused. What do you mean? Eric sighed. The Americans already know the war is over. They've known it longer than we have. They don't waste ammo on men who are already broken. They want to scare us, break our spirit, let us destroy ourselves. And it was working. Already, arguments were breaking out among the soldiers. Some wanted to flee on foot. Others wanted to surrender. A few still talked about going out in one last blaze of glory. Suicide through glory. Eric shut that down quickly, but the pressure was building. The real crack came when Captain Lorenz disappeared with 6 soldiers and one of the fuel trucks. Gone in the night. No word, no warning. By noon, one of the scouts returned with a pale face and shaking hands. We found the truck. Burned. The men inside. Shot! Weber's voice dropped. American ambush? The scout hesitated. No, not Americans. Eric's eyes narrowed. Then who? The scout swallowed hard. German partisans, locals. They're turning on soldiers. They think we're war criminals. Silence. It was one thing to be hunted by the enemy. It was something else to be hunted by your own country. The camp was falling apart fast. Eric knew he had to act. Fast. That night, he gathered the remaining 35 men. "We have one chance," he told them. "One shot to live." They listened, hollow-eyed, filthy, barely resembling soldiers anymore. "There's an old mining tunnel system near Wernigerode. Abandoned. Forgotten by most. If we can reach it, we can hide until the war ends. No radio, no light, just quiet. Long enough to survive." One soldier asked, "And then what?" Eric looked him in the eye. "Then we decide if we're still soldiers, or just men trying to go home." No one cheered. No one clapped. But no one argued. That night, under the cover of darkness, they rolled out. The stolen American trucks led the way, engines humming low. The last remaining tank guarded the rear. No headlights, just slow crawling through trees and fog. But they didn't make it far before the nightmare truly began. As they reached the old logging road, a sharp flash lit the treetops. Then the thunder of a shell. Boom! The rear truck exploded into fire. Men screamed. Metal tore. From the woods, flashes of gunfire erupted. Not American. Not Russian. It was worse. German voices. High-pitched. Angry. Shouting. Wehrmacht deserters. Surrender or die! A forgotten truth hit Eric like ice. The SS death squads were still active. Still hunting German soldiers who retreated or disobeyed. Even now. Even at the end, Eric dove behind a tree, grabbed his rifle and shouted, "We don't fire unless we're fired on again." But it was too late. The trap was already sprung. Germany wasn't just losing the war. It was now eating itself alive. The forest became a war zone within seconds. Fire lit the trees in an angry orange glow as bullets cracked through the branches. Screams of wounded men echoed in the night. Colonel Eric Hartmann pulled a bleeding soldier behind a tree, his hands shaking but his mind locked in survival mode. From behind the trucks, his men returned fire. But the SS were trained, brutal, and fueled by a twisted sense of loyalty to a war already lost. They didn't care that Eric's men were fellow Germans. To them, they were traitors. Cowards. Deserters who deserved execution, not understanding. Eric shouted, "Hold your fire! Identify yourselves!" hoping the enemy might hesitate. No answer came, just another grenade landing near the tank's rear. Boom! The tank's turret snapped sideways as its crew was thrown out in pieces. The vehicle became a fireball, sending heat through the cold forest air. The last armored hope they had, gone. Weber dropped beside Eric, face cut, rifle in hand. "We're surrounded. They're driving us into the ravine." "Let them," Eric growled. "It's our only chance." He ordered his men to retreat down the narrow mountain path that led to the mining tunnels. The plan had been to sneak there quietly. Now they'd be lucky to make it with half their men alive. They ran, slipped, crawled, dragged the wounded. The fuel trucks were abandoned, left burning on the hill. The stolen American gift had become a blazing beacon for death. Only 19 men made it to the ravine. Eric helped push a fallen log aside, revealing the entrance to the old mine, dark, cold, and wide enough to swallow them all. The wooden beams creaked with age. Dust filled the air like ghost breath. No one had been here for years. "Inside! Move!" he shouted as more shots rang from the trees behind. One last man, Private Rausch, was hit in the back just as he crossed the entrance. He died before anyone could pull him in. They sealed the wooden gate behind them with rocks and metal debris. Darkness swallowed them whole. The sound of gunfire faded outside. Inside the mine, silence ruled. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, one soldier broke the quiet. "We're trapped!" Eric lit a small lantern. The faces around him were pale, bloodied, hollow. Weber leaned against a wall, coughing from smoke inhalation. Most had dropped their weapons. Some were shaking. One was praying. "No," Eric said, his voice low. "We're not trapped. We're buried alive with our sins." The words stung. These were soldiers who had burned villages, carried out orders without question, and looked the other way when horrors happened. Not all of them, but enough. Some had joined the war as patriots. Others had become monsters without realizing it. And now, here they were, hiding from their own people, too ashamed to surrender to the enemy, too hated to be saved by their country. Weber asked in a broken whisper, "What now?" Eric looked deeper into the tunnel, where shadows stretched into blackness. "Now, we disappear." He divided the group into pairs, told them to explore the deeper tunnels, look for dry areas, old supplies, anything that could help them survive. Hours passed. They found rotten crates, rusted tools, and a hidden chamber with a collapsed roof that opened into a tiny underground stream. It was enough for water. They lit a few lanterns, built crude beds from crates and sacks, turned the mine into a ghost camp. On the third day underground, one of the soldiers, a former schoolteacher named Bauer, carved something into the wall. "We thought we were heroes. We were just lost men with guns." The message spread like poison. Men stopped speaking. Some refused to eat. A few began writing letters they would never send. Weber started shaking in his sleep, muttering about burning cities. Eric sat alone, staring at a tin of food. The taste of fuel was still in his throat. They had stolen 50,000 gallons from the Americans, enough to restart a war. And yet, here they were, hiding in a tomb of stone, hunted by their own, forgotten by their leaders, ignored by the world. That fuel hadn't saved them. It had only bought them a darker kind of death. The mine didn't smell like death at first. It smelled of old dust, rusted metal, and the damp stink of rotting wood. But after 6 days, it began to change. The stink of sweat, blood, and fear thickened in the air. The men didn't talk anymore. Not really, they whispered. And when they did speak, it was always about the same things. Food, water, the sound of footsteps that weren't there. Colonel Eric Hartman tried to hold them together, but even he was unraveling. Each night felt longer than the last. Sleep became a gamble. Men cried in the dark. One screamed in his sleep, clawing at the walls until his fingers bled. They had no clocks, no sunlight, only lanterns running low on oil. And the worst part? The silence wasn't always silent. Some nights, there were noises deep in the mine. Soft thuds, distant metal clinks, echoes that didn't make sense. At first, they thought it was just the mine shifting. Then Private Kruger claimed he saw a figure moving in the deeper tunnels. He swore it was a man, not one of them, just standing there, watching. Eric didn't believe him. Until the next night. When Kruger vanished, no one heard him scream. No one saw him leave. He was just gone. Panic hit the group like a fever. Soldiers began blaming each other. Accusations flew. Weber tried to calm them, but his voice cracked from stress. Bauer, the schoolteacher, was found burning his boots in a small fire, whispering about ghosts of the Eastern Front. And Erich? He started seeing them, not real soldiers, not men, but faces. The ones he remembered from villages in Poland, from burned homes in France, from train yards filled with silent, staring eyes. Civilians. Victims. People he couldn't save. Or didn't try to. They appeared in the shadows between lantern flickers, just for a second. Just long enough to make him question his sanity. On the 8th day, Weber broke. He stood in the center of the tunnel, his eyes wild, his uniform hanging off him like it no longer fit. "We're not soldiers anymore," he whispered. "We're rats in a coffin. And this is hell." Eric tried to grab him, calm him, But Weber pulled out his pistol and fired a shot into the dark, screaming at something no one else could see. Then he turned, the gun on himself. The blast echoed through the tunnels like a thunderclap. Silence followed. Then sobbing. 30 men buried Weber in the deepest chamber with their bare hands. No one said a prayer. After that, everything changed. One man tried to run back to the surface. He made it as far as the entrance, only to find the way blocked. A small rock slide, likely triggered by weather or time, had sealed them in further. He broke down sobbing, said he could still hear voices outside, said someone was out there, whispering their names. 2 others started carving strange symbols into the walls, like protection spells. They spoke in circles, muttering about punishment and being watched. Eric was cracking too, but he refused to show it. He kept writing in his notebook, his old officer's journal, pages filled with names of his fallen men, with questions, with guilt, with the truth. The war didn't kill us. Our choices did. That night, Eric sat alone in the lantern light, flipping through the journal. The last page was blank. He reached for his pencil, but it was already written. "You can't run from the dead, Colonel." His hand trembled. He hadn't written that. He dropped the journal, heart racing, looked around the mine. No one was near him. No one. Living, anyway. The deeper they went, the less anyone remembered what daylight felt like. The mine pressed down on them, not just with earth and stone, but with something colder, guilt, madness, and the sound of their own thoughts echoing back at them. Colonel Eric Hartman no longer felt like a colonel. He was just a man with dirty hands and a gun that felt heavier every hour. His men avoided his eyes now. They whispered that he was cursed, that the ghosts followed him, not them. On the 10th night, something inside the mine changed. The faint rumbling of artillery above had stopped days ago. The war, maybe, had ended, but none of them dared to hope. They had no radio, no signal, no proof. The world outside might have moved on, but down here, time had stopped. Then came the coughing. Private Lenz was the first to fall sick. His breath came in short gasps, his skin turning pale and clammy. The mine air was thick with smoke residue and mold. Within hours, 2 more were coughing blood. Eric ordered rest, but he knew the truth. There was no medicine, no escape. The men were dying slowly, buried alive before the earth even claimed them. That night, he caught Bauer whispering with 2 others in the dark. "We can't stay here," Bauer hissed. "He's keeping us trapped. He wants us to die like this." "You think I don't know?" another voice replied. "But he's still the colonel. If we cross him, we're already dead," Bauer snapped. "We should take what's left of the fuel and try to blow through the blocked entrance. At least we'll die fighting." Eric stepped forward, pistol raised. "And kill us all faster?" The 3 men froze. He looked at them one by one. "You think I want this? You think I don't dream of sunlight?" His voice cracked. "Every man I've buried, every command I've given. It haunts me too. But we don't fix madness with fire." Bauer's eyes were hollow. "You already did, the day you kept us from surrendering." The words struck deep. Eric lowered his gun. He wanted to shout, to justify himself. But what was there left to justify? He had led them into the mine to survive, and now they were starving, coughing, losing their minds. That night, he barely slept. When he woke, Bauer and the 2 soldiers were gone. So was one of the remaining fuel canisters. Hours later, the ground shook. A deafening explosion tore through the tunnels. Dust filled the air. The lanterns went out. Screams echoed from every side. The blast had come from the entrance, Bauer's final act of desperation. Eric crawled through darkness, choking, trying to find his men. His ears rang. He shouted names. Some answered. Most didn't. When the dust settled, he found the entrance completely collapsed, sealed forever. Bauer's body was buried under the rubble, half visible, his hand still clutching the empty fuel canister. Weber's body lay nearby, too, except Weber had been dead for days. Eric's mind froze. He remembered burying Weber deeper in the tunnel. How had his body come here? He turned slowly, and for a brief second, he saw Weber standing in the shadows again, alive, watching him silently, face pale and hollow. Then he was gone. Eric fell to his knees, shaking. He wasn't sure anymore what was real. The men that survived looked to him with terrified eyes. There were only 9 of them now. "What do we do?" one whispered. Eric stared into the dark where Weber had stood. "We keep going," he said quietly. "There's another exit deeper in the mine. I remember it. It's further down." He didn't know if that was true, but it didn't matter anymore. The only way left was down, and as they packed their things and lit the last remaining lantern, Eric felt a cold wind rush from the deeper tunnels, a wind that smelled faintly of oil, and something else, something that breathed. They moved into the lower tunnels like shadows fleeing their own graves. The air grew thicker, heavier, until breathing hurt. The last lantern flickered weakly, throwing broken shapes across the rock walls. No one spoke. The only sound was their footsteps, and sometimes something that sounded like another set of footsteps following a few meters behind. Colonel Eric Hartman led the line, one trembling hand gripping his pistol, the other clutching the flickering lamp. He could feel the men's fear crawling behind him like a living thing. They didn't need to say it. They all felt it. The mine was not empty. The deeper they went, the more wrong it felt. Old mining tools lay scattered across the floor, untouched for years. But some were clean, as if someone or something had used them recently. At one point, Private Muller tripped over a helmet. When he picked it up, he froze. It wasn't German. It was American. Eric took it from him, brushing away the dust. The insignia was faint, but real. The Americans had been here. Then a darker thought struck him. What if the Americans had known about this mine all along? What if this place wasn't an accident, but the real trap? Before he could speak, a sound rippled through the tunnels, metal dragging against stone. Then a whisper, soft and almost human. "Erich." The lamp shook in his hand. He turned sharply, pistol raised. "Who said that?" No answer. Just the slow echo of dripping water. But the men heard it too. One of them began sobbing. Another started muttering a prayer. Then the light went out. Total darkness. Someone screamed. A shot fired. The sound bounced endlessly through the cave. Eric shouted, "Hold your fire! Don't!" Another shot. Another scream. When he finally managed to relight the lamp, 2 of his men were gone, vanished into the black. Blood streaked the floor, disappearing into the deeper shaft. "Colonel," whispered the youngest soldier, shaking uncontrollably. "We're not alone." Eric's voice was cold, mechanical. "Move! Now!" They kept going, one by one, down a steep slope that led to a wide chamber. There, in the center, they found the truth. Half buried in the dirt was a metal structure. Old, rusted, covered in soot. It wasn't part of the mine. It was a tunnel door, built by the military, stamped with a faded eagle and the letters WG17. Weber's voice echoed in his mind. "They're watching. They want to see where the rats go. This wasn't a mine. It was a test site." The Americans hadn't just left the fuel as bait. They'd wanted to see what desperate men would do for survival. They had lured them here, tracked them, studied them, and trapped them in an old German weapons tunnel. There were no ghosts, no demons, just the ghosts inside their heads. Eric's throat closed. "They were never coming for us," he whispered. "They wanted to see us destroy ourselves." Then came another sound, the low hum of air vents. Still running, still alive. He followed it deeper, through a narrow passage, until he reached a sealed steel door with a cracked glass window. Beyond it was a faint blue light. He wiped the glass, peered through, and froze. Inside, lying across the floor, were American soldiers. Dozens of them, long dead. Skulls, uniforms, rusted weapons. But their bodies were arranged in lines, as if someone had placed them there. On the wall behind them, written in English with dried black oil, were the words, "We thought you'd come." Eric stumbled back, trembling. His men stared at him, waiting for orders. He had none left to give. Then, quietly, he said, "This mine isn't a prison. It's a grave, and it's waiting for us." The last lantern sputtered again. The flame stretched, danced, then died. Darkness swallowed them whole. Only Eric's voice remained, calm and hollow. Germany was doomed long before we lost the war. We just didn't know it. A single spark flared, the flash of his pistol. Then, silence. Far above, the mountain slept again. And somewhere, in the ashes of a war already over, 50,000 gallons of stolen American fuel still waited, untouched, and forever cursed by the men who thought it would save them.